Kaz, it's really interesting that you mentioned that your role as a translator, because one of our attendees mentioned that he has recently translated a video soundtrack into 20 languages, which normally would have taken 20 different translations, but in fact, he used AI and did it in probably 10 minutes. So that whole role that was technically quite sophisticated, difficult to do, and a role perhaps you did, um, maybe in question now. And he asked the question, uh, is it the norm that these sorts of professional jobs are going to be the ones that are really impacted? Is this going to, and is this going to affect career choices in future? What's your view on that?
I absolutely think so, that it will be impacting. And I think we have a responsibility to the generation that comes after us to, I think there was a bit of a flux maybe a few years ago of pushing that next generation into things like coding and engineering. And we have to admit that the outlook and the prospect of the economy has changed completely. You know, the landscape is completely different to what it was when I was at school. And it's the skill sets that at the moment AI doesn't necessarily have in its toolkit, which are those the reasonings and that element of being able to potentially make some decisions that are based emotionally. And we might not always agree that that's the best way to do it, but we have to have that human in the loop side. And I think making those decisions helped out by AI, but not necessarily having that as the ultimate factor for it is huge. But I think children are learning in a completely different way. They are, I think, a few steps behind a lot of organizations and businesses are. If you listen to some of the secondary school things, they're trying to avoid having children use AI towards their homework. But I don't know about you, my children are having their homework marked by AI. And there's a clear gap here where we're almost telling children that it's not okay, but it's in their future, it's coming, and we need to teach them to use it responsibly and ethically and in a way that puts them in the best position to use this for good in the future.
Absolutely. May I make some comments, Frank, about
Of course,
both
please
Rosie?
do, Ajit.
Thank you. So thank you, Rosie and Cassie, both for your work. Of course, I know about your respective work, but again, it's very nice to see that. I just wanted to emphasize a couple of things which you both said. I mean, the thing which Rosie said, which struck me most, was about lots and lots of forward deployed engineers, and I think that we at AirDosh are definitely very keen on that particular idea because that is the big gap in the role in the job market today, and it's a gap which many young people can fill in, many domain experts can fill in, maybe people can transition to AI with that. And I think that I think Cassie touched on the emotional part of it and the translation part of it, correct? Because that actually requires you to be sitting with the end user, and trying to understand, and the translation actually is translating their real requirements into a product and prototyping it with the Lovable or a Claude or something like that, and making it real within that. And the other point I wanted to share is Rosie talked about her role being a people role. Absolutely, I very much agree with that. I know Rosie is super technical with her Claude skills, and she always comes up with very cool ways to do things. But the point here is that she sees this role as a people role, leading a group of people and helping them to transition with that. And the two final points is that the tools are only halfway through. Absolutely right, because yes, you can get a 365. Yes, you can get all these things, but they are custom, they are generic tools. They do not actually do what you are supposed to do, nor do they understand the guardrails which need to be built around your business. So this is where the jobs are. This is where the value is of people. And that brings me to the final point: is personalized education, which is again something which we have been emphasizing a lot within AirDosh and also Oxford, is that education is going to change in a personalized way. The forward deployed engineers are absolutely the translators and what's needed to take the job to the next level with that. So those are my comments, Frank. Thank you, both Rosie and Cassie, for your great insight.
Ajit, that's great. Let me just pick up on one of the questions from our attendees. And when you talked about education, what are the formal qualifications that are relevant or upcoming for people to look at if they're starting in education today, and they're thinking about this future with AI? What are the formal qualifications they should be looking at?
So is it for me? Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
please
I'll
do.
have a first very small perspective on that. I think formal qualifications are important, but not the end of it. And I think most people today would agree with that. I think a degree or a qualification is a signaling mechanism. A signaling mechanism meaning that I'm teaching at Oxford. I've worked with certain things. I've done certain things in my work. Shows that I am capable of handling complex tasks. If you can do that in a proxy using other ways or complement that with your skill education, I think that's great. That's how I would look at it. I wouldn't even worry about a specific thing. Even if you're a philosopher, I think you could be a forward deployed engineer, probably a better forward deployed engineer than a traditional engineer, because of the aspect which Cassie said about understanding emotion, understanding perspective, understanding empathy, stuff like that. Very good, thank you. So I'll let Rosie and Cassie handle that.
Yeah, thanks, Ajit. I think just to add to that, so my background, I have a very unusual background into technology, even before kind of generative AI was so prolific and so available. So I did an events management degree at university, and then I actually became an online English teacher, teaching English to students in China online. And then I decided I wanted to work from home, and this was before COVID, and so learned to do programming. So I think it just emphasizes what Ajit was saying, that whilst formal qualifications are important and they definitely make it easier to step into places in the workplace, actually AI makes it much easier to reskill into other domains. So I had a conversation with a good friend of mine the other day, and her daughter is now going off to university, and she said, Rosie, I'm kind of despairing here because she wants to go off to university and do dance. And what job is that going to get her? And I said, if she wants to go to university and spend 3 years of her life dancing, how fabulous is that? Because the fact that we have one of the first moves our government has made is made all of these AI training courses available online for free, just really emphasizes how much this does democratize access to education, including getting into really complex things like programming and machine learning and even building AI models. You can actually learn using generative AI. So if a young person was asking me today, what should I do? What should I do for my GCSEs or my A levels? I'd say pick the things you love the most, because AI really is making that access to further education much easier for all of us.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that. Can I stay with you, Rosie, on the topic that you raised earlier, and that was around regulation.
Mhm.
You mentioned Europe's regulation framework as being one of the primary responses to AI. Um, and there are some who feel that it's a framework designed for a world that's already moved on from it. And certainly some of our attendees have asked questions about regulation, like who will be regulated, how will that happen, and how do you use governance to reduce hallucination? How does that work? So there are some big questions in people's mind about regulation, about governance. Um, and there's a kind of even a bigger question, and I want to pose to the three of you. Is European regulation protecting us? Should we look at it as a protection, or should we be questioning it as ceding to China some of the ground around development, speed to market, and the things that may increase China's ultimate competitiveness and hold Europe back? What's your feeling on that? Rosie, start with you, and then I'll come on to your colleagues.
Let me answer that in two ways. So, to the first point of your question around how does governance help reduce hallucinations? Now, that is where I think it's really, and I'm talking specifically at an organizational level here. And this is why I think it is really important to have somebody in senior leadership within an organization that is looking at AI usage holistically across the business. So it is in my mind, not effective to be looking at AI as some other thing that you are doing in the business. Rather, it should be looking at how you use AI to do the thing that is your business. So that's the first thing. And then in that case, governance comes through your data, how you operate your systems, and how you educate your people. So that's the first point I wanted to make on governance. And if you get those points right, and if you are building AI systems or using AI systems with really good, well-managed data, and you have really well trained and educated people, then you are able to reduce hallucinations. You're certainly able to reduce outputs that are created using AI damaging your business or kind of going outside of the business that still include hallucinations, because your people are able to work with AI effectively. And then to the second point on the EU AI Act, and is it fostering innovation or is it preventing us from getting ahead with AI in the UK? Now, as I kind of alluded to in my initial point on this, my view is that it probably is too restrictive, and we are at an kind of at risk position currently in the UK. We don't have any sovereign AI. We are currently very dependent on the US for our AI models and even data center access. And the EU AI Act is pretty restrictive for startups and technology companies to be able to develop systems that are going to be beyond anything that is already being developed in the US and China. And China obviously has the benefit of the kind of copycat culture that is so ingrained in their tech development world. Now, we have an almost a kind of opposite approach in the UK of like, this is mine and I don't want anybody to see it and this is my kind of IP. But actually, what's so important with AI is that it should really drive this like abundance mentality, because it should mean that we are all able to develop and innovate at a much faster rate. And I do believe that AI will drive abundance in society. It means that we are all, every one of us on this call, every one of us that we know, is able to have a conversation with some thing, some system that has access to all information, basically, that has been printed or created in the last 50 years, that's available online publicly. So the opportunity there to ideate, to innovate, to think of new ideas related to existing businesses or brand new businesses, to improve the ways that we work and learn, should be available to all of us. So if we are restricting the systems that we can then build off of the back of that, which the EU AI Act currently is pretty restrictive, then that really prevents us from capitalizing on that effectively. And we are already, of course, seeing now that China is able to innovate really, really rapidly. Partly it is due to that kind of copycat culture that I mentioned, but it is also because the regulation actively is promoting them to do that. They're actively encouraged to do it. Ajit, I see you've come up.
Yeah, sure. I just want to see if Cassie had any comment before I'll add a couple of thoughts on this.
Just a quick one, really. So, in theory, regulation, I think, for this, especially this industry, is a good thing. The EU AI Act, I completely agree with Rosie in that it is too restrictive, but I think we do need to be careful with balancing responsibility with innovation at the same time, because responsibility without any form of regulation is living on a hope and prayer that the right thing will be done. And I think that is one thing that is really important, is that we are doing the right thing, even if others necessarily aren't.
Perfect. So I'll add a couple more thoughts on both your comments and especially what Rosie said. So I talked about AI governance, correct, at the enterprise level. So when you think about it from that perspective, what I think it should be is value plus safety plus compliance plus trustworthiness plus accountability and controls. Correct. So if you think about it in that holistic way, you almost do not need any external person to regulate you, because you will do the right thing if you take that perspective. And the question then is not what you can do, but what you should do. If you inculcate that mindset with these things, that is that sort of the value, safety, compliance, trustworthiness, accountability, and controls, and then you will also be responsible for all the agents in your organization acting on your behalf. This is the other really big thing which people are not 100% understanding what the implications of that. And finally, I wanted to add one more point about the EU AI Act. And in between all the three of us, and we are all practitioners, we tend to be a little bit skeptical about the EU AI Act, and rightly so. But I wanted to add one more important point. If you think about what is happening in the UK, despite all the sort of ups and downs, the UK AI is booming. It is absolutely through the roof. And if you look at the seed round investments, I mean Professor David Silver from UCL, his company, I forget the Ineffable, I think some such name, had $1 billion seed round, $1 billion seed round. And we got at least two more, one from Cambridge and one from UCL or Oxford, having about half a quarter of a million seed rounds with that. And the point about these companies is they are deep tech companies. The word deep tech means they are science oriented. They have a fundamental scientific breakthrough on which they are going with that. And that, I think, is where the future of the UK is. We are not going to be able to compete against something small, nor actually are we going to compete against Americans with their social media dominance with that, correct? So whatever the platforms we have are not European or UK based. So we are going to be able to compete on fundamentals of science. And I think this is the value with that. And of course, the AI Act is not relevant to that. The reason is because it is about the people. So what we are going to focus on possibly is a tangential aspect of that. And I admit that I am saying that with a sort of an Oxford maths perspective in mind. And I admit that most people may not be even touching those areas, but I honestly, seriously request people to look at them, because this is huge, correct? I mean, what $1 billion seed round for a company in the UK. I think it's London or Oxford, I don't know which one, but it's amazing, correct? We should be proud of that, despite of all the sort of things up and down going with that. And major companies are here. Google is here, OpenAI is here, Anthropic is here, you name it. Salesforce has invested, Microsoft has invested. So people somehow value the UK ecosystem and education system. Perfect. Thank you. I will hand over back to you, Frank.
Thanks, Ajit. Let me pick up on a point there around education. It's a couple of comments that came in from different people. One was around the concern that a lot of the information that is coming from AI, from using LLMs, is either very complicated or inaccurate. And it's sometimes hard to make a judgment on that. Another point that came out was around AI and children. Government, which is currently thinking about regulating social media and ostensibly regulating technology with young children, could be cutting off their ability to learn by doing, their ability to really experience the pace of change and transition in all technologies, not least of which AI. So I want to just come to a question there around how are people who are not in technology now, not in formal training, maybe not in large organizations that can support them with training, but are in small businesses maybe, or just at home using AI, or are young people preparing to come into the world of business? How can these people get best prepared? How can they use the technologies most effectively and actually find their way through some of the perhaps complicated or inaccurate language that comes across?
So I'll say something quick. I'll say something quickly, then probably hand over to
Sure.
Rosie as well. Two comments. The first one is that I think James Ellis must be online. I think, but James and I have talked about this idea of Orwell versus Huxley. Correct. So Orwell, so Orwell talked about control. Huxley, Aldous Huxley with the Brave New World talked about sort of giving all the freedoms to people and things like that. And in both cases, you actually end up relinquishing control as people. Because in the Huxley case, the risk is that because everything is given to you and everything is free and everything is easy, you stop thinking for yourself. And I think this is the most critical part, is the ability to think for yourself. And that is what we should inculcate with the young. And regarding the young, and Rosie's got young kids, and Rosie and I have been having this discussion. And I know that she explores small language models and local language models with that. So if you are smart enough technically, I'm not saying everybody can do that, but it is definitely possible to run a model completely on a restricted environment with no external connection. And it's relatively easy to do, but it is actually should be possible even if you have a toy. It should be technically possible to ring fence it in such a way that it is safe. So that's all I wanted to say. Maybe Rosie has and Cassie have something more.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm so grateful for you bringing in two of my great literary heroes into a conversation about technology. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Rosie, would you and Cassie like to pick up on those thoughts?
Yeah, I worry I'm not going to have nearly as good as book references as Ajit, so I can only apologize for that in advance. But actually, Ajit has kind of segued me into exactly the response that I wanted to make on this, which is around local AI. Now, what we currently see in a lot of organizations, most organizations, is using the cloud models, right? So ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, the models that are available through these SaaS products. But actually in schools, and I think at all levels, right from primary school through to high school, and then probably in universities as well, a much better, secure, and governed approach is going to be using local AI. So that's AI that you run on your own servers, on your own systems, that can be enhanced using your own data and knowledge bases. And that reduces the risk of exposing children and young people to data that's on the information that's on the internet, information that's available through kind of live web searches, and you can also narrow the focus of the information that you make available to those people. You then don't run the risk of them sharing information online. So all of their prompts and all of the outputs remain on your own servers. So Ajit mentioned I'm actually doing this with my own children at home because I'm a bit of a nerd and that's something I like to do at the weekend. I want to make AI available to them in a secure way. I don't want them uploading they're currently uploading voice recordings, and then an AI owl is telling them like that their singing is a bit out of tune, for example. And I don't want them uploading their voice recordings into the cloud because they're only 8 and 10 years old. So I think we will see a bigger focus and a bigger emphasis on this. Ajit mentioned toys. That is a really interesting area. I know Ajit does a lot of work already on AI and edge devices, but I think the opportunity there for young people and children, we will see an explosion of products in this space, I believe. Into university and then access to training and how do people securely work with the tools that are available right now. It's a real minefield, I think, for a lot of universities and colleges right now, because exactly as Cassie mentioned, the approach where educators say, you must not use generative AI to help you write this essay or to help you with this piece of homework is completely in vain, because try telling a 15-year-old how to do their homework, well, best of luck with that. And if, as you say, Cassie, the teachers themselves are then using AI to help them mark the homework, then we have to have some clear standards. And that is where I do think enterprise grade tools within education settings, so things like Copilot for Microsoft 365, Claude for Enterprise, is a good first starting point. Cassie, I know you have children in high school, so I don't know if you want to make some further comment on that.
I think one thing I think that can be really interesting to note with this, and perhaps this is me outing myself as a bit of a stumbling block on my parenting skills, but there was a moment with my children probably a few months ago where we were discussing the topic of AI and what's okay to put in, what's not okay to put in. And something that came out of the woodwork there is that they have had absolutely no knowledge that the Alexa that we have in our home uses AI. as far as they were concerned, they were just talking to a computer. And this is absolutely a gap on my part because considering my role, it's a responsibility I have to educate them there. But we are not all technically minded, and I think it's difficult for parents in this kind of landscape to know what you don't know and what you should know and what you should be participating in. So I think Rosie is absolutely correct that there needs to be, I think, something within going right down to primary school level, primary school, secondary school, university, that is teaching children, what's an appropriate way to use these, what tools there are that are available. But there's a gap there at the moment in being able to supply that to children because, I mean, could you imagine a school saying, have this open access to ChatGPT, children, have fun? So I think there is a bit of a gap at the moment in figuring out what the right way is to do that, particularly where minors are involved.
Let me take you to a somewhat broader topic, and that's about the competition between the US and China currently, and how that's accelerated, particularly in the area of AI and technology, and in production of technology resources. Um, do we think that this competition is going to be something that could accelerate the speed of transition as we look at things like AGI? Or do we think it's actually going to be something that becomes a more limiting factor as perhaps great nations stop sharing information due to the need to compete at a commercial level? And I'll throw that up to the panel. Ever like to start us off on that one?
Yeah, I'll start on that. If that's okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Great.
So there's two comments here, two kind of data points here with that. The first one is, at least in the public domain, the Chinese say that they're not trying to build an AGI. I'm sure they are, but publicly they are saying that we prefer the quote unquote deep seek approach. The deep seek approach is a more engineering based approach, which has lots of small increments to improve the model such that it becomes viable with that. Now, the second question, I think, is in my mind, the real risk of this is not only is it accelerating the ecosystem per se, it's actually going to create a very severe lack of competency between various countries, not just China and the US, but more broadly with that. And I think most countries are beginning to realize that, especially post tariffs, especially correct over the last year or so. Most people have realized that okay, the word sovereign AI is a word talked about by NVIDIA mostly to talk about the GPU capacity, but I'm looking at that word more broadly to say that everybody should develop their skills, their competency, their knowledge, their abilities, and pass them on to the younger generation. So I think that this is where people are now going to look. I mean, I will give you one example. There is an investment of from ASML, which is one of the hottest companies, into a company called Mistral. So Mistral is a French LLM, relatively small in the broad scheme of things, but it's a very important investment. If that's where Mistral would go in the future, I think it's great for the French ecosystem, correct? I mean, a European ecosystem as well, because you're creating a group of companies through that infrastructure, which could potentially be something great. So that's my comment. Yeah.
I think I would just add on the benefits of the open source approach which China are taking. And actually, AI companies broadly are increasing their open source approach. So I actually think that this AGI kind of fantasy, right, which is people love to talk about AGI because it's so sci-fi and it's so mystery and people really don't know what it means or what it looks like. And we talk about this kind of time after AGI. But actually, I think the journey to AGI, even if AGI never comes, is where the opportunity is. We are in the crux of the opportunity right now. And the fact that so much is being open sourced and so much is being shared, I think that is where, as Ajit mentioned, actually we have so much innovation, whilst it might not be specifically on GPUs and large language models, there's so much innovation already happening. And the DeepSeek movement massively drove that and accelerated that and highlights how open source really does benefit across seas. So yeah, I'm really actually positive about that. But I think I'm a big blue sky thinker, and I also love kind of having these big discussions about what does AGI look like. But actually, there is so much amazing opportunity and innovation happening right now. So I think it's really important to recognize that.
Would like to think actually that the open source model is something that will be kept and will sort of continue to spread as people see the benefit of this. I mean, that sort of closed doorness of it will mean that it will come at a detriment to those companies as well. I think the businesses that are open to sharing their information will receive that benefit of other people's information, and they will have the support of the people behind them that potentially, if you are hunkering down with information, you're just not necessarily going to have that resource available to you if you're not offering it up.
Okay. Well, I want to come on to the topic of jobs very quickly. And it's quite a funny question. If when you look at the media and the way AI has been described as a threat to all employment, but particularly professional employment, there is a huge fear factor that's been brought into the market, into public discussion. But actually, American labor market data tells a very, very different story. And they're using the term AI blamed for the number of layoffs and reduction in jobs. In fact, they suggest that the reductions in the workforce in America is largely due to restructuring exercises, possibly post-COVID, not really the role of AI replacing people's jobs. So I'm going to ask you to make a choice, each of you, and maybe just in one sentence each. Do you think we're sleepwalking into serious employment disruption, or are we being frightened by projections that maybe will just outrun reality? So where do you stand? Ajit, kick us off on that. Where do you stand on those points?
Okay, so I think that we are being frightened by the projections, and there are lots of very nuanced people like Andrew Ng and people like that who also said the same kind of thing. Now, I do want to caveat that I do believe that the challenges to the young people are real. People who are just entering the employment are real, and they are arising due to a number of factors, and there is an element of AI into that particular category, mainly because if you look at entry-level jobs, at least in my field, many of them, if you look at like a junior developer looking at building a dashboard, correct, that's a prompt, that's a lovable prompt today. If you look at any kind of data visualization, that's a prompt as well. So you're starting to think about that sort of thing, but I think that it's still overrated in some ways. So my I would go to the idea that the job scare is a scare by the media with that.
Okay, Rosie and Cassie, 1 minute each.
So I think that there is fear definitely sells newspapers, right? So I think there's a big amount of fear mongering. However, I will also caveat my response with that. I do think there is going to be disruption in organizations. And I also think that the impact on young people is very real, and that education institutions need to be doing much more right now to prepare the future workforce for that.
Cassie?
I'd agree on that there is fear mongering, but I don't think it's completely unfounded. I think that fear predominantly for people comes from the unknown. They don't know what their role is going to look like. So it's not necessarily that role is being made redundant, but it has changed, and people are not being trained quick enough to accommodate with that change. And it's that fear of the unknown.
Thanks very much for that. And let me thank you all for what is an incredibly insightful evening. In just an hour, covered so much ground, and we're very grateful for you giving us the time and your knowledge on that. Also, let me thank our attendees for sharing some of their questions in the chat room. And helping to shape the program as we move forward. Can I just remind everyone that events are on the Ideas Network 2030 website. Please keep in touch, find out when the next ones are coming up, and certainly look forward to the Summer University, which is coming up in a few months. Get details on the website, and please join us there. Again, to all of you, thank you very much. On behalf of the Ideas Network 2030, I'm Frank Negriello, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thank you.
Thanks all.
Take care. Bye bye.